You know, when I signed up to be a military liaison on Galactic Peace Station Harmony 7, I thought the biggest challenge would be preventing interspecies wars. Turns out I was wrong. Dead wrong. The real challenge was apparently going to be one very small, very loud baby. The station looked impressive enough from the outside, a gleaming testament to interspecies cooperation floating in the neutral zone between 12 different star systems. Inside, it was basically a cosmic United Nations, except with more tentacles and fewer coffee breaks. Ambassador Quilex, a nervous bird-like avian with feathers that changed color based on his anxiety levels, was currently sporting a lovely shade of panic yellow as he fluttered around the main diplomatic hall. Captain Voss. He squawked, his translator struggling to keep up with his rapid-fire speech. This is a disaster of unprecedented proportions. The crystalline delegate's offspring has been producing sound waves at 127 decibels for 73 hours, 14 minutes, and 32 seconds. The Zephyrian delegation is threatening to withdraw because the frequencies are interfering with their meditation cycles. The mollusk contingent claims the vibrations are disrupting their slime production. And don't even get me started on what it's doing to the neurotic collective's shared consciousness. I leaned against the observation deck railing, watching the chaos unfold below. Dr. Marin Goldscale, our resident Saurian pediatrician, was frantically consulting what looked like a crystalline tablet the size of a dinner table while surrounded by enough blinking, beeping equipment to launch a small spaceship. His reptilian features were scrunched in concentration, scales shifting from their usual emerald green to a stressed-out bronze. The baby in question was about the size of a human infant, but looked like someone had carved it from living quartz. Beautiful, really, except for the ear-splitting wails that had been echoing through the station's corridors for the past 3 days. Its parents, two larger crystalline beings who looked like walking chandeliers, stood nearby in what I could only assume was their species' version of exhaustion. "Have we tried turning it off and on again?" I asked, which earned me a horrified gasp from Ambassador Quilex. "Captain, please. This is a sentient being, not a malfunctioning data pad." "Right. Sorry. Just checking if we'd covered all the basics." The truth was, I felt bad for everyone involved. The parents looked ready to shatter from stress, literally. Crystalline beings could actually crack under extreme emotional pressure, and these two were showing some serious fault lines. Dr. Goldscale had that particular look of a professional who was rapidly running out of professional solutions. And Ambassador Quilex? Well, his feathers were now approaching a shade of yellow I was pretty sure indicated imminent nervous breakdown. "Perhaps," came the station's AI voice from the overhead speakers, "we should consider containment protocols. The infant could be placed in a soundproof environment until—" "Absolutely not," Dr. Goldscale hissed, his scales flashing an indignant red. "Separation from parental units during the bonding period could cause irreversible psychological damage to a developing crystalline consciousness." The wailing continued, somehow managing to hit a frequency that made my teeth ache. Around the diplomatic hall, various alien species were covering their auditory organs or retreating to their quarters. This was turning into exactly the kind of diplomatic incident that could unravel months of peace negotiations. I had to admit, watching a bunch of hyper-advanced alien civilizations get completely stumped by a crying baby was pretty entertaining. These were species that had mastered faster-than-light travel, dimensional folding, and quantum consciousness transfer. But one small, upset infant. Total chaos. How hard can it be? I muttered under my breath, which apparently wasn't as quiet as I thought because Ambassador Quilex's head snapped toward me like I'd just suggested we nuke the station. What followed was basically a masterclass in how not to handle a crying baby, Alien Edition. Dr. Goldscale had wheeled in what he called the harmonic pacification array, which looked like a disco ball had mated with a medical scanner. The device hummed, beeped, and projected soothing geometric patterns while analyzing the baby's emotional resonance frequencies. According to Goldscale, this was cutting-edge Saurian child psychology in action. The baby's response? even louder crying if that was physically possible. Perhaps the chromatic wavelengths are incorrectly calibrated, Goldscale muttered, frantically adjusting holographic controls. Or maybe the sonic dampening field needs recalibration to account for crystalline neural pathways. Meanwhile, Ambassador Quillex had decided to try diplomatic negotiation with a baby. I watched in fascination as he approached the crying infant with the same formal protocol he'd use for a trade dispute. Honored young delegate. He began, his translator working overtime, on behalf of the Avian Confederacy and in the spirit of interspecies cooperation. I formally request that you consider reducing your vocal expressions to a more diplomatically acceptable level. Perhaps we could arrange a treaty of mutual understanding? I'm prepared to offer 3 ounces of premium seed mixture and guaranteed nesting rights in Sector 7. The baby was apparently not interested in diplomatic immunity or premium seeds. Next came the cultural solutions. The Zephyrian delegate suggested harmonizing the infant's chakras through interpretive wind dancing. This involved a lot of floating around while making swooshing noises. The baby was not impressed. The mollusk representative oozed forward with something they claimed was a traditional birthing slime that would supposedly calm any distressed young. The smell alone made half the diplomatic cohorts evacuate the area, but the baby just kept crying. The neurotic collective tried to establish a psychic connection with the infant to understand its needs. They stood in a circle, humming in frequencies that made the station's lights flicker. After 10 minutes, they announced that the baby was experiencing existential uncertainty about its place in the cosmic order. Helpful. Even the station's maintenance drones got involved, creating what their programming classified as optimal nursery conditions: perfect temperature, humidity, lighting, and air composition. The baby remained thoroughly unimpressed by optimal conditions. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Goldscale announced, consulting his tablet again. "According to all established xenopediatric protocols, at least one of these approaches should have achieved pacification by now. Crystalline offspring typically respond favorably to harmonic resonance therapy." "Maybe," suggested the Zephyrian delegate, "the infant requires a more advanced approach. We could attempt a 4th-dimensional lullaby sequence. Or," added the mollusk, "perhaps traditional fermented kelp extract applied to the auditory sensors." I was starting to wonder if any of these species had actually figured out how to raise their own young, or if they'd just gotten really lucky for the past few million years. The suggestions were getting more elaborate and more ridiculous by the hour. Ambassador Quillex was now pacing in tight circles, his feathers cycling through the entire visible spectrum of anxiety. The Arcturian delegation has formally complained about the disruption. The Centauri observers are considering this a breach of diplomatic protocol, and the trade representatives from the outer spiral are threatening to invoke the noise pollution clauses of the Galactic Accords. The crystalline parents looked like they were about to literally fall apart. They'd been apologizing non-stop in their harmonious bell-like language, which their translator kept rendering as deeply sorry for sonic disruption, and seeking forgiveness from honored delegates, will accept any reasonable punishment for offspring's behavioral deficiencies. It was heartbreaking, really. Here were 2 beings who'd probably traveled light years to participate in these peace talks, and their baby was turning into a diplomatic incident. The poor kid probably just wanted something simple, but everyone was so focused on applying advanced alien science that they'd forgotten basic common sense. I found myself actually feeling sorry for the little guy. All these adults standing around with their fancy equipment and elaborate theories, and nobody was just, trying to comfort a distressed baby. "Captain Voss." Ambassador Quillex fluttered over to me, now displaying a particularly alarming shade of crimson. "Surely the human delegation has some advanced child care protocols we haven't considered? Some sophisticated Earth technique for managing infant distress?" I looked around at all the blinking gadgets, the concerned alien faces, the increasingly desperate suggestions being thrown around. Advanced Earth techniques. "Right. Well," I said slowly, "I suppose we could try something." The moment I volunteered, you could practically hear the record scratch. Every alien in the diplomatic hall turned to stare at me like I'd just offered to perform surgery with a butter knife. The human wishes to attempt infant pacification? Dr. May. Goldscale's scales shifted to what I was learning meant polite skepticism. Captain Voss, while we appreciate your willingness to assist, this requires delicate xenopediatric expertise. Crystalline neural development is extraordinarily complex. Ambassador Quillex's feathers were doing this nervous flutter thing. Perhaps we should consult the cultural databases first? Human child rearing practices are noted as being rather primitive compared to more advanced species. Primitive. Right. I had to bite back a laugh. These were the same advanced species that had just spent the last 4 hours failing to calm one upset baby. Look, I said, stepping down from the observation deck, I'm not claiming to be an expert on crystalline physiology. But crying babies are pretty universal, and sometimes simple solutions work better than complicated ones. The truth was, I knew a thing or two about crying babies. When you're the oldest of 8 kids and your parents work double shifts at the terraforming plant, you learn fast or you go insane. My youngest brother Marcus used to scream for hours until I figured out he just wanted to be held while facing outward so he could see what was going on. My sister Jenny would only calm down if you hummed old Earth folk songs. And don't even get me started on the twins and their complicated sleep schedules. But explaining that to a bunch of aliens who thought humans were barely civilized warmongers? That was going to be interesting. Human child rearing methodologies, Dr. Goldscale was saying, consulting his tablet, are classified as instinct-based rather than scientifically optimized. Most human parents operate without proper training or certification. That's because most human parents figure it out as they go, I said, walking toward the baby. We don't have instruction manuals for our kids. We just adapt. The crystalline parents stepped back nervously as I approached. Their translator was working overtime, producing what sounded like a very polite version of "Please don't break our baby." I knelt down next to the little one, who was still wailing away with impressive lung power. Up close, the baby was actually pretty cute in a geometric sort of way. The crystalline structure of its body caught the station's lights and threw tiny rainbows across the floor. "Hey there, little guy," I said softly, ignoring the various scanning devices Dr. Goldscale was pointing in my direction. "Having a rough day?" The baby's cries didn't stop, but they seemed to shift slightly, like it was listening. I reached out slowly, giving the parents time to object if they wanted to. When they didn't immediately panic, I gently placed my hands on either side of the baby, supporting its head the way I'd learned with my siblings. The crystalline surface was warm and smooth, with a faint vibration that I could feel through my palms. "That's interesting," Dr. Goldscale muttered, watching his scanners. "Human body temperature appears to be optimal for crystalline comfort zones. And the tactile stimulation is registering as soothing?" The baby was still crying, but less frantically now. It was the difference between panic crying and just regular upset crying. Any parent would recognize it immediately, but I was surrounded by beings who were trying to analyze it with quantum sensors. "Sometimes," I said, gently adjusting my hold to support the baby's back, "they just need to feel secure, safe, like someone's got them and won't let them fall." I started to sway slightly, the way my mom used to when I was little and had nightmares. Just a gentle rocking motion, nothing fancy. No harmonic frequencies or chromatic wavelengths, just movement. The crying quieted a bit more. Around me, I could hear the aliens muttering in their various languages. The translations were picking up fragments, unprecedented response, primitive methodology showing efficacy. How is this possible? But I was focused on the baby. Its cries were becoming less desperate, more like the tired fussing of a kid who was ready to sleep but didn't know how. I'd heard that sound 1,000 times growing up. "You know what I think?" I said to the room in general, still swaying gently. I think this little one is just tired and overstimulated. Look around, bright lights, constant noise, dozens of strange beings. If I were a baby, I'd be pretty upset too. The baby's cries were definitely quieter now, almost conversational. Like it was trying to tell me something instead of just expressing distress. And then I remembered something my grandmother used to do when nothing else worked. Something so simple and so human that I almost felt embarrassed to try it in front of all these advanced alien civilizations. But desperate times and all that, I started to hum. The song that came out wasn't anything fancy. Just Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, probably the most basic lullaby in human history. My grandmother used to hum it when she rocked me to sleep during thunderstorms, and I'd hummed it to every one of my younger siblings at some point. The effect was immediate and absolutely magical. The baby stopped crying. Just like that. Complete silence fell over the diplomatic hall like someone had flipped a switch. The only sound was my quiet humming and the gentle hum of the station's life support systems. I could feel every alien in the room holding their breath or whatever they did instead of breathing. Dr. Goldscale's scales had gone completely white, which I was pretty sure indicated shock. Ambassador Quillex's feathers had frozen mid-flutter. Even the station's AI seemed to pause its usual background chatter. The baby made a soft sound, almost like a contented sigh, and its little crystalline body seemed to relax in my arms. The harsh geometric edges softened slightly, and the rainbow refractions became gentler, more peaceful. "How?" Dr. Goldscale whispered, his voice barely registering on his translator. "How is this possible?" The infant showed no response to our harmonic therapy sequences, which are scientifically calibrated for optimal neural stimulation. I kept humming, afraid to break whatever spell had settled over the baby. "Sometimes the old ways work best," I said softly. "Human lullabies aren't scientifically calibrated for anything. They're just familiar, comforting. Something parents have been doing for thousands of years because it works." The crystalline parents moved closer, their bell-like language chiming softly. The translator picked up fragments: "Gratitude beyond measure, miracle worker. How did the human know?" "I didn't know," I admitted, still swaying gently. "I just remembered what worked with my siblings. Sometimes babies cry because something's wrong, they're hungry or hurt or sick. But sometimes they cry because they're scared or lonely or just need to know someone cares about them." Ambassador Quillex had apparently recovered enough to speak, though his feathers were still showing colors I'd never seen before. "This is unprecedented. Human child rearing instincts proving superior to advanced xenopediatric protocols. We must document this immediately." The baby's eyes, which were like tiny kaleidoscopes, fixed on my face as I continued humming. It reached up with one small, faceted hand and touched my cheek, making a sound that didn't need translation. Pure contentment. "The physiological readings are remarkable," Dr. Goldscale muttered, frantically consulting his scanners. "Heart rate normalized, stress hormones declining, neural activity shifting to rest patterns. Captain Voss, what exactly are you doing that our equipment could not replicate?" I thought about it for a moment, still humming quietly. "I'm not trying to fix a problem or apply a solution. I'm just being here, present, letting the baby know it's safe and cared for. Human parents don't have fancy equipment or scientific protocols. We just have instinct and experience and the willingness to try whatever works." The baby's eyes were getting heavy, its crystalline features softening as it began to drift toward sleep. The tiny hand that had been touching my cheek gradually relaxed. "Incredible," breathed the Zephyrian delegate. "The human achieved in minutes what our combined expertise could not accomplish in days." "This changes everything," Ambassador Quillex said, his feathers now cycling through what looked like excited rainbows. "If human instinctual methods are this effective, we must completely reconsider our approach to interspecies childcare protocols." The mollusk representative oozed forward, their translator crackling with curiosity. Human Voss, could you teach us this humming technique? Our young sometimes experience similar distress patterns. Even the neurotic collective seemed impressed, which was saying something since they usually considered individual consciousness primitive. The harmonic simplicity achieved remarkable neural resonance. We must study these lullaby patterns. But I was focused on the baby, who was now sleeping peacefully in my arms. Its breathing had settled into a gentle rhythm, and the rainbow refractions from its crystalline body had taken on a soft, dreamlike quality. "There we go, little one," I whispered, barely audible. Sometimes all we need is someone to hold us and tell us everything's going to be okay. The silence in the diplomatic hall was profound. Not the tense, frustrated silence of the past few days, but peaceful, comfortable. The kind of quiet that settles over a room when everyone finally relaxes. And in that moment I realized something that probably should have been obvious from the start. All these advanced alien civilizations, with their incredible technology and sophisticated theories, had forgotten the most basic truth about taking care of the young. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most powerful ones. As I carefully transferred the sleeping baby back to its parents, something remarkable happened. The entire diplomatic hall erupted in what could only be described as an alien brainstorming session, except everyone was actually talking to each other instead of past each other for the first time since I'd been stationed here. Dr. Goldscale was frantically taking notes on his tablet, his scales shifting through excited greens and golds. "Captain Voss, this instinctual parenting concept could revolutionize our approach to xenopediatrics. We've been so focused on technological solutions that we've overlooked the psychological benefits of simple physical comfort." "But how do you quantify instinct?" asked the Zephyrian delegate, floating in thoughtful circles. "How do you teach something that isn't learned but simply known?" I settled into one of the diplomatic chairs, still amazed at how quiet the station had become. "That's just it, you don't teach instinct. You trust it. Human parents don't go to school to learn how to love their kids or comfort them when they're upset. We just do it because it feels right." Ambassador Quillex's feathers had settled into a thoughtful blue-green. "This explains certain anomalies in our diplomatic records. Human negotiators often succeed where more advanced species fail, not through superior logic or technology, but through what we've classified as emotional intelligence." The mollusk representative made a sound like bubbling water, which their translator rendered as laughter. "We have been approaching child rearing like engineering problem inputs and outputs, cause and effect. But human approach treats child as fellow being, not problem to solve." "Exactly," I said, warming to the subject. "Kids aren't broken machines that need fixing. They're little people with feelings and needs that don't always make logical sense. Sometimes they cry because they're tired, sometimes because they're frustrated, and sometimes just because they need to know someone's listening." The crystalline parents had been consulting their own translator, and now approached me with their characteristic chiming speech. "We wish to express gratitude beyond our ability to articulate. Our offspring had been distressed since departure from homeworld. We consulted many specialists, tried many recommended protocols. None achieved what human Voss accomplished with simple presence and sound making. Their formal politeness was kind of heartbreaking. "You don't need to thank me," I said. "I've got 7 younger siblings. Trust me, I've seen every kind of crying fit in the book. Sometimes the fancy solutions don't work and you just have to go with what feels right." Dr. Goldscale looked up from his note-taking. 7 offspring? Human families typically raise multiple young simultaneously? Well, my parents were a bit ambitious, but yeah, it's normal for humans to have more than one kid. We kind of figure it out as we go. Each baby is different, so what works for one might not work for another. You learn to adapt. This caused another flurry of excited chatter among the delegates. Apparently, most of their species approached child rearing with detailed manuals and standardized protocols. The idea of figuring it out as you go was revolutionary. Ambassador Quillex cleared his throat importantly. Captain Voss, I believe I speak for the entire diplomatic corps when I say we would be honored if you would consider heading our new interspecies child care initiative. Your practical expertise could prevent future incidents and improve the well-being of young beings across the galaxy. I had to laugh. Yesterday you all thought humans were too primitive to understand advanced alien problems. Now you want me to teach childcare to the galaxy? The neurotic collective spoke in unison, which always creeped me out a little. We have learned that primitive and ineffective are not synonymous. Human methods may appear simple, but they achieve desired outcomes through principles we had not considered. What principles? I asked, genuinely curious about how they were interpreting basic human parenting. Dr. Goldscale consulted his notes. Primary principle appears to be empathetic present sense, being fully attentive to the young being without attempting to immediately modify its behavior. Secondary principle involves intuitive comfort provision, offering physical and auditory stimulation based on instinctual rather than analytical assessment. I blinked. That's a very fancy way of saying pay attention to the baby and try to make it feel better. Precisely, said the Zephyrian delegate. But we had overcomplicated a fundamentally simple process. The crystalline parents chimed in again, their baby still sleeping peacefully in their arms. The translator offered, request permission to designate offspring with human name in honor of Captain Voss's assistance. Oh, you don't have to. I started to protest, but Ambassador Quillex was already fluttering excitedly. An excellent suggestion. Cross-species naming honors are a cornerstone of diplomatic friendship. What human designation would be appropriate? I looked at the sleeping baby, peaceful in content now, rainbow light playing gently across its crystalline features. How about Hope? It's a good name for someone who brought a bunch of different species together. The station's AI chose that moment to chime in, request permission to add human lullaby database to cultural archives. Analysis indicates significant psychological benefits for multiple species offspring. Sure, I said, still somewhat stunned by how this had all turned out. Though I should warn you, most human lullabies are pretty simple. We're not exactly known for our sophisticated musical compositions. Sometimes, Dr. Goldscale said, carefully closing his tablet, simple is exactly what's needed. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in what used to be Conference Room 7 but had been hastily converted into the Interspecies Childcare Training Center. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same room where we'd held formal diplomatic sessions was now filled with alien delegates learning to change diapers and mix formula. Well, the alien equivalent of diapers and formula, anyway. Remember, I was saying to a group that included 2 Zephyrians, a very nervous mollusk, and Dr. Goldscale, the key is to stay calm. Babies can sense your stress, so if you're panicking, they're going to panic too. The practice baby, a sophisticated holographic simulation that could cry, fuss, and generally act like any normal upset infant, was currently wailing at about 70 decibels. Dr. Goldscale approached it with the same cautious precision he'd once used for quantum surgery. Physical contact first, he muttered to himself, carefully picking up the holographic baby, gentle support motions. And then he started to hum, though it came out sounding more like a reptilian growl than a lullaby. The holographic baby immediately stopped crying. Outstanding progress, Doctor, I said, trying not to laugh at his expression of scientific vindication. You're getting the hang of this. Ambassador Quillex fluttered over, his feathers bright with excitement. Captain Voss, I've just received confirmation from the Galactic Council. They're formally requesting you to establish childcare protocols for all diplomatic stations. This could prevent dozens of future incidents. And added the mollusk trainee, whose name translated to something like gentle current, my spawn siblings have shown remarkable improvement using human comfort techniques. We are most grateful. It was pretty surreal, honestly. A month ago, these same beings had considered humans barely civilized. Now they were taking notes on human parenting techniques like they were ancient wisdom from some advanced civilization. The really funny part was how natural it all felt. Turns out, most of the basic principles of taking care of kids translate pretty well across species lines. Be patient, pay attention, offer comfort when they're upset, and remember that sometimes they just need to know someone cares about them. Baby Hope, officially designated Hope Harmony 7 in the diplomatic records, had become something of a station mascot. The little crystalline was thriving under what Dr. Goldscale had officially termed integrated instinctual care protocols, but what everyone else just called the human way. The peace talks had resumed and were actually going better than anyone had expected. Turns out, when you get a bunch of different species working together to solve a common problem, even something as simple as a crying baby, it builds the kind of trust that makes everything else easier. Captain, the station's AI announced, incoming priority transmission from Sector 12. The Andromedan delegation is requesting immediate assistance with what they describe as unprecedented juvenile behavioral disruption. I looked around the training room at the group of alien delegates who were now confidently soothing holographic babies, humming lullabies in 12 different languages, and discussing the finer points of nap time scheduling. "Let me guess," I said to Ambassador Quillex, "teenage problems?" His feathers went through a brief rainbow of amusement. The transmission mentions adolescent entities refusing to comply with established social hierarchies and expressing individual preferences contrary to species norms. So teenagers being teenagers. It would appear so. I stood up, stretching muscles that were still getting used to the lower gravity on the station. Well, I guess we better pack up the childcare manual and figure out how to explain human teenagers to the galaxy. Dr. Goldscale looked up from the holographic baby he was successfully rocking to sleep. Do human adolescent management techniques also rely on instinctual methods rather than technological intervention? I thought about my siblings at various stages of their teenage years, the drama, the rebellion, the constant need for independence while still wanting someone to tell them everything would be okay. The midnight conversations about everything and nothing. The way a simple "I believe in you" could mean more than hours of lectures. "Yeah," I said, grinning at the thought of trying to explain teenage attitude to a bunch of hyper-logical alien species. "Yeah, I think they do." Ambassador Quillex's feathers fluffed with what I'd learned was anticipation. Then we're prepared for whatever challenge awaits. After all, if humans can solve the mystery of crying babies, surely adolescent difficulties will prove equally manageable. I had to laugh. These aliens had no idea what they were getting into. But then again, neither had I when I'd first held little hope and started humming an old Earth lullaby. Sometimes the best solutions really are the simplest ones. And sometimes being human with all our supposed primitive instincts and unscientific approaches is exactly what the galaxy needs. As we prepared to depart for Sector 12, I could hear the soft sound of alien lullabies drifting through the station's corridors. Different melodies, different languages, but all carrying the same basic message that parents had been singing to their children across species and across time. Everything's going to be okay. Someone's here. You're not alone. Not bad for a primitive species, if I do say so myself.